prepare a production cost report and also do journalizing, but we're working in a second department. Refreshing Water Company produces premium bottled water. In the second department, the bottling department, conversion costs are incurred evenly throughout the bottling process, but packaging materials are not added until the end of the process. Costs in beginning WIP inventory include transferred in cost of $1,400, direct labor of $700, manufacturing overhead of $330, and March data for the bottling department follows. And so we have our beginning inventory, which is 40% complete, production started, transferred out, and our ending inventory, which is 70% complete. And then in dollars, we have costs associated with transferred in, direct materials, direct labor, manufacturing overhead, and total costs. And so the requirements ask us to prepare a production cost report for the bottling department for the month of March. The company uses the weighted average method. Then second, prepare the journal entry to record the cost of units completed and transferred out. And then finally, post all transactions to the WIP inventory bottling T account. What's the ending balance? And so I'm going to hide those requirements so that we're just seeing the information to give us a little bit more room for our Excel sheet here. And then we might still have to do some scrolling. So we're going to start out with our production cost report. We always start out with the table focusing on units. And so now we have whole units, but also this transferred in column, which we didn't have in the previous production report when we were doing a first department. Now that we're doing a second department, we have transferred in. So let's start with the whole units, our beginning WIP. And so if we come up into our data table, we have beginning inventory of 15,000 units. So we'll type here 15,000. Oops, I forgot a zero. Then we need what was transferred in. And so our production started was 160,000. And so that gives us a total of 175,000 units that we need to account for. As far as accounted for, completed and transferred out was 152,000. Our ending WIP was 23,000 units. And so that's a total of 175,000 units accounted for. And so that's our first double check. Units to account for and accounted for are the same. So it's a good sign for us to keep moving forward. As far as transferred in goes, this is going to be 100% because if they're transferred in, the costs have been added to those already from the previous department. So those are both 100%. Now we could technically pull our sum over. Now we need to deal with direct materials and conversion. And so it told us that the direct materials are added at the end of the process. So for completed and transferred out, it's 100% because even though it's at the end of the process, they had to have been added for us to transfer them out. So we'll carry that over. Then for the ending WIP, we're going to take our 23,000 times 0%. So that means 0, of course, because no materials have been added since they're only 70% complete. And I'll go ahead and pull over, that formula, adding those together, so it'll pull over 152,000 for us. As far as conversion costs go, they're added evenly throughout the process. So if it's completed and transferred out, it's 100%. For the ending WIP, we have 23,000 times, and it told us, I thought somewhere we saw, okay, 70% complete, so times 0.7 for 16,100, and we will pull our sum function over for total units accounted for, conversion costs 168,100. So now we can come down to the costs portion of this production cost report. And so cost to account for beginning WIP was 1,400. Cost added during the period, 135,100. And let's just move across this row. So for direct materials, there was 0 for our beginning inventory, which, if we think about it, makes sense because materials are added at the end. So if those were only 40% complete, no materials should have been added. So that makes perfect sense. 30,400 were costs added during the period. For conversion costs, they gave us direct labor and manufacturing overhead separately, so we just need to add those together. So 700 plus 330 gives us 1030, and I accidentally did it in the wrong row. Cost added during the period, 33,100 plus 16,300 for 49,400. And now we just need to do some sum. Wow. Functions across our row. And then once we've done that, we can pull it down. And then we'll also sum for each column. And pull that formula across our row. And so we now have total cost to account for, and 217,330 is the total costs, and it's broken down for transferred in materials and conversion as well. And then over here we have the breakdown of WIP versus beginning WIP versus the cost added during the period. So now we need to divide by the total equivalent units of production, which we're just pulling from our units portion of our report. So we'll say equals and reference up to the number of units. We'll drag that across. And now we actually plug in the formula. So we'll say equals the total cost to account for divided by our total EUP for 78 cents per EUP. I'm going to pull that formula across. And now we just use the information from our units and our costs to get the cost accounted for, completed and transferred out, as well as ending WIP. And so for completed and transferred out, we're going to say equals, reference up to our completed and transferred out, times cost per EUP, make that an absolute cell reference so that we can drag our formula, press enter. And because we made that an absolute cell reference, we can pull that across to materials and conversion. Oops, sorry, we can't do that. We can pull it down. The issue is that, let me go back into this formula. This cell reference is locking in the column and the row. And so really, we want it to only lock in the row, not the column. So let's try that again. So in the formula, you see that I have equals I-27, which is the units accounted for, completed and transferred out, times $38, which is the reference to the cost per equivalent unit. And the $sign is locking in only the row, not the column. And that will allow us to drag it to the right. And we see the number update for the completed and transferred out times materials equivalent unit, cost per equivalent unit. So for our ending WIP, we need to do our ending units times our cost per equivalent unit, and we'll do the same thing where we lock in only the row, not the column, so that we can pull that across. And so then we have total cost accounted for. We'll do a sum of these two different costs that we calculated. And we can pull this all the way over. And so now we just need to do a sum function for each row. And so we have total costs accounted for $217,330. And so now our production cost report is completed. And we need to do requirement 2, which I have to scroll back up, prepare the journal entry to record the cost of units completed and transferred out. So we'll come down here. And we're going to take the debit is going to be our finished goods inventory because we've completed them and transferred them into finished goods inventory, and the credit is going to be to WIP bottling because they're coming out of the bottling process, and it's going to be the total for our completed and transferred out, so $194,560. And if we wanted to add a description here, we'd say something like units completed, costs assigned to finished goods. And then requirement 3 said post all the transactions to the WIP inventory bottling T account. What is the ending balance? So come down here. We'll start with our beginning balance as of March 1. And that was sorry, I should have said equal. It's up here. 2,430. And actually I do have it here, so we can reference. Our beginning WIP, 2,430. Then we're going to look at our transferred in, and that was 135,100 coming from our initial data set. We have to look at direct materials and direct labor. So direct materials, 30,400, direct labor, 33,100, manufacturing overhead, 16,300. Then on the credit end of things, we have transferred to finished goods. And that was a credit for $194,560. And so that gives us an ending balance as of March 31. And let's do a open parentheses sum, and we'll add all of our debits together. Close parentheses, minus our credit, and close our second set of parentheses, for $22,770 for our ending balance.